Yeah, so hello, my name is Susanna, and I'm a writer and researcher based between Glasgow and Oxford. I recently completed my postgrad degree in gender and sexuality studies, where I was researching lesbian transmasculine relationalities. So, considering how people in cross identity relationships create liberating environments in their home and in their communities. I'm also currently working on a collaborative interview and creative writing piece for an activist journal called Sinister Wisdom. And outside of my research, I teach and edit academic book reviews for the Journal of Lesbian Studies. So I do a mixture of academic writing, creative writing, poetry, life writing, and editing at the minute.
Amazing. And so, what were the ideas that kind of led you into your field of study on maybe a social sense? What were the patterns or power dynamics that maybe led you to be interested in that area?
Yeah, so I had come across a lot of writing that was focusing on the fact that lesbian communities are a lot more diverse than they're often framed in the media, especially at the moment with a lot of, very critical, harmful rhetoric. And it just completely contrasted, one, my own life, and also I found nothing written about lived relational experience. It was often we are more than just this one identity. But then there was nothing about how people are actually living their lives and how people are actually stepping away from certain norms and creating a very liberating world for themselves. So I wanted to focus on relationships and people's relationship to one another through interviews as well, because within a lot of academic research, yes, of course, there are a lot of sociologists who are focusing on lived experience and interviews, but not not the subjects that I was interested in. And also, there isn't a lot of room given to people's voices. So I wanted to do a real community based project that would allow me to, dialogue with people who I knew. Some of my participants I was personally related to, and then others were complete strangers. And it was also just a real site of connection. So I wanted to use my time, in the research sphere using that space in order to extend a hand more towards my community rather than, using it for other reasons, which is, equally valid. But I wanted to sort of bring the community into the academic space.
So this might sound like a really obvious question, but what would you say from your research are some of the reasons why that space wasn't already bigger?
Mm,
Flawed.
yeah, I mean, it's a complex one. I think a lot of research is based on trends to an extent, and the wave of research that I was interested in, there was a lot of voices speaking about this in the late 90s when a lot of queer conversations began to emerge within the academic sphere. And I mean, lesbian studies in of itself is a very small discipline for various reasons, misogyny, homophobia, all of those. And even within lesbian studies as well, there are, of course, certain tendencies, certain norms, more of a focus on cis perspectives, more of a focus on other disciplines such as um, history or literature, which I work with as well. But I think the main thing is that these relationalities, these relationships are not new, but more people are talking about them today, on social media and the public sphere. But academia is often, of course, a couple of steps behind because we need people to produce the research to respond to certain waves in lived experience that are coming to the fore within more popular narratives. So I think it's a relatively new area of work, not because the lived experiences are new, but because more people are discussing it and thus more research needs to be produced. So, yeah.
And again, it might sound like an obvious question, but what's the value? What do you see the value of taking up more space and, in an academic sense, exploring and documenting the diversity of the queer experience?
I think honestly, it's what I learned, and I think what I consistently came up against and across when I was doing this project was that things that appeared very obvious to me were not common knowledge to other queer people and of course to people who are not queer as well. And I think there is a tendency that when we live our life in a certain way, that we think, well, of course, this is normal. It's normalized. This is just what people think. But that's not the case. Like, it's a prime example of, again, sort of the wider narratives being a few steps behind how people are actually living. And I don't feel like the research that I put across was particularly, unique. It's just documenting the way that a lot of people in my life just live. But this is not necessarily common knowledge. We're a very small subsection of society, and people were very interested. Like, after I got a lot of comments being like, oh, I wasn't aware that this is how some people framed these identities or some people understood these identities. So I think while a lot of queer people, researchers and writers may sometimes feel like, oh, is my perspective unique? Do I have anything to contribute? Often it's the case that, well, you do, because what's common knowledge to us is not common knowledge at large.
Absolutely. And that brings us quite smoothly onto your workshop that you're running for us soon, which is going to cover queer literature and some advice for queer writers. Could
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so in our workshop, we'll discuss queer storytelling methods and we'll go through some recommendations in the first half. And this will be looking at some extracts from texts that I've come across and found inspiring, and I'll try to get a diverse array of perspectives there as well. And we'll have the opportunity to discuss these excerpts, thinking about how they might inspire our voice and shape our creative practice. And then following this, I'll share some practical strategies for developing voice, confidence, and intention in your work. And the workshop is just a real chance for us to come together and inspire each other's creative growth, talk about if there's anything that we want to achieve this year, or if there's just maybe you've never written before and you want to write something for the first time. It's also a space for experimenting with your ideas and having very personal, private goals as well, and being able to share them. And I think as well, when it comes to queer writing, there are a lot of challenges that people face. Writing, I think a lot of queer people, their first sort of point of call is writing about their own life and their own experiences, which is great. And more people should absolutely do that. But of course, this can feel really revealing. And I think many people worry that, what they've said has been said before, or that it just feels too exposing. And I think as well that marginalized people do often face this expectation to write autobiographically. And it's assumed that our writing reflects our own lives, even if it doesn't at all. And in this workshop, something that we'll discuss is overcoming some of these hesitancies around writing about yourself and also finding ways to integrate your own lived experience into more creative and experimental writing. And this as well can be helpful for people who are feeling a bit hesitant, but also people who maybe haven't come out yet or maybe aren't ready to talk about their queer experiences. We can talk about ways we can leave traces of our queer lives within fiction narratives without compromising anything like safety or your emotional health or just your general creative interests. So there'll be lots of room to discuss ways to find your own voice and to also hide your own voice and experiences in your text if that's something that you're interested in.
Sounds brilliant. I can't wait. Thank you so much.
Thank you.